Hi, everybody. It is Natalie. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that the technology is working okay. And if you'll just bear with me for a moment here. Let me check and make sure. How is everybody doing? Happy winter solstice to all of you out there. And let me check and see if my live is being picked up here. Oh, here we go. Yes. With me for a moment. Okay, perfect. Hey, everybody. My name is Natalie, and I'm an astrologer here on YouTube. And today I'm going to go over the astrology of beautiful super Scorpio, Demi Moore. And let me go ahead and share my screen with you, and I will begin. Okay. And let's see here. I don't know why I always have to look for it every time. And let's see. There we go. Perfect. Okay. Excellent. And I will go ahead and begin. So everybody, this is Demi Moore, and she was born November 11th, 1962. She's aged 61. She looks amazing. And she is an actress, and probably many of you have known her from the movie Ghost, which was one of her most famous movies that she did. And let me just go ahead and see. There's a photo of her there when she was younger. I'm going to, let's see. I got a bunch of stuff to show you guys. So the movie Ghost, you guys may remember that from 1990, where she has this bowl haircut and short haircut, and she's in the movie with Patrick Swayze, and he's died, and she's like talking to his spirit, and they're on the pottery wheel together. This is a movie that Demi Moore did. And let me go ahead. I'm going to click back to her Wikipedia here. Anyway, so Demi Moore, she did the movie Ghost in 1990. She was in the movie A Few Good Men in 1992, Indecent Proposal, Disclosure. And in 1996, she became the highest paid actress in the film industry when she received an unprecedented $12.5 million to star in the movie Striptease. And she also did Charlie's Angels Full Throttle, which you guys may remember from 2003. And she played Madison. I think her character's name was Madison Lee, maybe, but her name was Madison, and she was like a fallen angel, basically. And at that time, when she did Charlie's Angel in 2003, she was 40 years old. And she showed up in a bikini in the movie and like looked totally flawless. But anyway, Demi Moore has been around for a while, and she's had a pretty interesting life. And the reason I got interested in her in particular is because I picked up a copy of her memoir, Inside Out, okay, that was released in 2019, and her life has been crazy. And she talked about herself as like she was born in Roswell, New Mexico, but she's like, she called herself a dirty kid from Roswell, New Mexico. Like, how did I get to this point in my life? And just kind of reflecting on her journey. And so let's go ahead and take a look at her chart here. And as I titled the video, Beautiful Super Scorpio, we have 4 planets in Scorpio here at the top of her chart. We have Venus, Sun, Neptune, and Mercury all in Scorpio. And you'll probably notice right away that she does have Venus retrograde at 20 degrees Scorpio in her natal chart. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that Venus at 20 degrees Scorpio retrograde. We'll touch on that quite a bit. Hi, Return to Sender. Thank you for being here. Thank you, my friend. Happy winter solstice. We are going to take a look at Demi Moore's chart. And basically, yeah, the Venus retrograde in Scorpio, we're going to talk about a lot in this reading because it's very pivotal and critical for her. And we also will be talking a lot about the fact that she has Jupiter in Pisces on her ascendant with Chiron right there. and that she also has the ruler of her ascendant opposite that, Uranus. Okay. But before we get too deep into her chart, I just want to point out some of the main things. So she has her ascendant is at 22 degrees Pisces. Her sun is obviously in Scorpio, right there between Venus and Neptune, and her moon is in Taurus. So look at that Taurus moon opposite all of these planets right here. So we're going to end up talking about this opposition quite a bit as the moon opposite all these planets in Scorpio as we go through her chart today. Now, one thing you'll notice right away is that Demi Moore was born on a full moon. And you can see that here because she has sun opposite the moon, sun in Scorpio opposite the moon in Taurus on that full moon. And sometimes being born on a full moon can make someone, I've known some people born on a full moon, and some people that I've met born on a full moon are extremely attractive, magnetic. They really do and Demi Moore is very much has that magnetic Scorpio quality to her. And a lot of her, we're going to talk a lot about the difference between Taurus and Scorpio. They're two opposite signs, but she really does have this way. She's an extremely gorgeous woman, first of all. And we can see that she has a Sun-Venus conjunction, which a lot of people who are, really nice looking, easy on the eyes, have a Sun-Venus conjunction, is what I've kind of noticed. And especially being born on a full moon like that, a very, and it's with Neptune too. So a very sensual, but also sensitive, but also, prone to falling in love really hard, really fast, going deep with people. And we'll see that in her chart as we look at it. And her chart also, to me, really talks about, loyalty. Like loyalty and stability is really important for a moon in Taurus. And the moon in Taurus represents our emotional needs and the things that make us feel comfortable, as the moon has to do with comfort and safety. And so for her, being grounded and being, loyalty, stability, feeling grounded in her environment is very important to her. And when you read about how she grew up in her memoir, her story of how she grew up is anything but that. Like, she had the most chaotic childhood. Both her parents were alcoholics, both had tempers, both were they were constantly moving all the time when she was growing up, because of her father's gambling debts and people were after them, or, her father was cheating on her mother. And so to get away from the mistress, the mother would be like, we have to move, we have to move. And so, her parents were both very manic and had a very explosive relationship. And you can see here too, when we talk about the parent in the chart, and I'm going to get into more detail about her parents in general, because both of them were just straight up a piece of work. But one thing when we're in astrology, when we're talking about the parents, one thing we do want to pay attention to is what aspects like the sun and the moon are making, because the sun represents the father, the moon represents the mother. And in the astrology chart, the sun and moon are the luminaries or the lights or the things that give life. And so when you think about yin and yang, the mother and the father, that type of thing for a child, it's only natural we would think of the sun and the moon. And so definitely looking at this full moon opposition to, it was a full moon. So we have the sun and the moon are opposite to one another, squaring Mars, okay, and with Neptune. And as I said, her parents were both alcoholics. They both fought all the time. They both like to fight. There's a story of her mother being at a restaurant and like being so mad at the waitress for the way that she brought the bill over that she beat the waitress with her shoe. And so we see that, Moon square Mars there. We also have a lot of stories about her father loved to gamble and fight. We have the Sun square Mars. Okay. Both of them, like I mentioned, alcoholics. Oftentimes when you see, and her mom also was super into pills as well. But like when you see Sun Neptune, Moon Neptune, not always, not in every chart, but a lot of times when you do see that as heavily as we see, particularly in this chart, I mean, it is really, really, Sun Neptune. And then we have the Moon opposite Neptune right there. She just had a very chaotic childhood. Her parents were all over the frickin' place. And we will talk more about that as we get into her chart. The other thing I just want to mention too is that when we're analyzing, particularly in Renaissance astrology, which is the version of astrology that I learned, the fourth house represents the father or the foundation or the your family's foundation, which in Renaissance astrology is represented by the fourth house. And then the 10th house, the opposite house, is representing the mother. And so when we look at the ruler of the fourth house representing the father, we see the father is this Mercury in Scorpio and is in a conjunction with Neptune. And the mother then would be the 10th house. And then the mother would represent that Jupiter opposite Uranus. And her mother was very unpredictable, extremely unpredictable. And when they were younger, would like drag Demi to like bars with her in order to kind of like seduce men. And so we're going to talk more about that. And when we see the parent opposite Uranus, that also is a huge indication that that parent could be extremely abnormal, probably very unique, different way of parenting, but also maybe very, very unstable. And, mother as ruler of the 10th house, this Jupiter here with Chiron in Pisces, her mother was also a huge victim who always saw herself as like, something. And Demi was always the one that had to take care of her or be the strong one, which we can see, oftentimes in the charts of children who kind of have to step up and be the strong one in their families. A lot of them I do see Moon in Taurus, okay? Or you may see other planets in Taurus where that person has to kind of be the strong one or be the stable one or kind of be the grounding force. And when everything else around them is going crazy, she talked about having to dig pills out of her mother's throat as a child because her mother had tried to take her own life. And her mother tried to do that multiple times and to get attention from her father. And, her mother had her when she was 18 years old. And so her mother was very young and immature. And this is the life that Demi lived, growing up, moving from place to place to place all the time. And, just running around in total chaos. And honestly, when I saw the ruler of her ascendant, which is represented by this Jupiter in Pisces, opposite this Uranus, immediately I thought, well, yeah, of course, because we have the ruler of the ascendant opposite Uranus. So she's always like running around all the time. Her life is very chaotic. There's not a lot of stability, but stability is what she craves, right? With the moon in Taurus, I have a fundamental need and desire and to crave stability in my life, but I'm constantly all over the place. There's a story about how her and her mother moved 7 times in 1 year, which is just crazy. She had to drop out of school. Like she just couldn't continue on. She left home when she was 16 years old and left the apartment she shared with her mother and never looked back. The other thing that I would say too, with, the ruler of the 4th house representing father or just the foundation of the family in general. We see that Mercury in Scorpio, there was always a lot of secrets, and secrets that were kept from Demi growing up as well, such as her father that she grew up with wasn't actually her real biological father. And everyone else knew it in the family except for her. And she found out, I think she was like 15 or 13, maybe 15 or 13 years old when she found out. So everyone knew except for her. And, you know, when we think about Scorpio, Mercury in Scorpio with Neptune representing the fourth house of family, we can think about secrets or lies or things that are under the surface that, you know, she didn't really know about or she wasn't really aware of, but everyone else was. And I imagine that that felt like a huge betrayal when she found out that that secret had been kept from her, you know, pretty much her whole life. And so, you know, she did have a extremely colorful childhood. And it's interesting that, you know, she is a Pisces rising. And although she has a bunch of planets in fixed signs, like she has all these planets in Scorpio, we've got Taurus, we've got, you know, Mars in Leo, we've got Saturn in Aquarius, right? She has a lot of planets in fixed signs. Her Pisces rising, she really talks about in her book about being, you know, like having to be very adaptable her whole life because they were always moving around everywhere, and how she was always the new girl and trying to fit in all the time and trying to kind of fit herself into her environment and kind of be like a chameleon and change to her environment, which, you know, Pisces they really do, like a Pisces rising person, depending on the rest of your chart, right? But a Pisces rising person or person that's heavy Pisces may have a skill in that area of being able to like be adaptable and change depending on your environment. And, you know, for her too, I think there was a big emphasis with Jupiter rising in her first house of, you know, being a good girl and like, you know, smiling through all the pain and kind of like, you know, trying to have a good attitude about everything and maybe shoving down what she needs in order to kind of take care of other people, which is also, you know, a Pisces thing as well, too. But you can see we have Chiron is also with Pisces there. And we'll talk more about that in a minute, in that sense of I have to kind of like be the good girl for everyone, but I'm hurting inside. You know, I have to be the strong one, moon in Taurus, right? And the moon is exalted in Taurus. It's a strong position for the moon, but it's like, I have to be the strong one. I have to be the one, like, even though I have to act like I'm doing fine, like inside I'm hurting, right? Chiron and Pisces in the first house. And so that's just a little bit as we start off her chart. I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a teaser there as we go into it. And we're definitely going to break it down a lot more. Now, so I mentioned to you guys, like she does have a lot of water and earth in her chart. Now, she does have a Mars in Leo, which is going to help her be that survivor, like, you know, kick-ass warrior woman, but she does have a lot of earth and water in her chart, and she is lacking in air energy and fire. Now, she may have a hard time letting go when she makes a deep emotional connection with someone. And we see that with the Taurus Scorpio energy being activated there in those fixed signs of Scorpio having to do with emotional depth and emotional complexities. And, you know, Taurus having to do with loyalty and stability. And so, you know, like when she really starts loving someone and caring for someone, you could see where she may have a tendency to sacrifice her own needs, right? So our moon in our chart represents our needs and what we need and how we nurture ourselves. And then Venus represents our relationships and what we want to share with others. And so you can see her needs are in an opposition to her Venus at 20 degrees Scorpio retrograde, which says, you know, I sometimes get confused between what I need and what's important for my relationships. And sometimes I put the needs of other people above my own needs. And so we're going to talk a lot about, what that meant for her. And certainly, growing up around two alcoholic parents, she does talk about in her book about how she had to address her issues with codependency and relationship and her tendency to put her partner above herself. And you can see the ruler of the seventh house of partnerships is this Mercury, okay? This Mercury in Scorpio, and her partner is in a conjunction with Neptune. And so it's like, this whole thing of I idealize my partner, or I put my partner's needs up here and I look up to my partner and I idealize my partner, but I'm not very good at balancing my emotional needs, Moon and Taurus, opposite my partner. So we're going to talk more about that too in her chart and how that works. And I'm sure a lot of us can relate to her chart. And, honestly, when I read her book about her relationship with her mother, I was like a little bit triggered. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do this chart, because some of the things that went on in her relationship with her mother, I could definitely relate to. And I think that, her mom was really like all about relationships and into men, and never really, parented Demi in any kind of a way. And she was used to kind of showing up for her mother, I feel like. So in like having to take care of her, she said at one point she felt responsible for keeping her alive. And so, you see the moon representing mom, moon as mother, opposite Neptune, right? So her mom really a lot of times like out to lunch. But let's go ahead and we are going to get into it. So as I mentioned, she was born during a full moon. It makes her very magnetic, very beautiful, very intense person. All those things, that being born on a full moon, magnetic, sensitive, just all those like emotions running high. Like some moons have a way of like draining you, but then other moons have a way of becoming like very heightened emotionally. So she was born at this very heightened time of emotions with this sun moon opposition in Scorpio Taurus. And what's interesting is on the very last page of her book, she talks about her journey. She's like 55 or something when she wrote this book. But she talks about how at the end of this book, it's like, I was standing out under the sky and I looked up at the full moon and I finally felt okay just being by myself. And I thought that was like so poignant and poetic, and leave that to like, a Sun, Venus, Neptune conjunction person to kind of be like ending her book in this very poetic way of, I was looking up at the moon and it was full. And I realized I'm okay with me and I'm okay being alone for like the first time in my life. And I thought, wow, what a beautiful thing, a beautiful way to kind of end her book. And it's even more poignant because she was actually born on a full moon. So I thought, oh my gosh, that is pretty interesting. Now, as we go through it, I do think she has with the moon in Taurus, opposite Venus and Scorpio and all these other planets, I do think she's highly dedicated to her relationships, but also, like I said, prone to idealizing her partners. And she did talk about growing up as she was being like moved around all the time by her family, how, they were constantly moving from coast to coast all the time, which is also very Jupiter rising. Plus she has all these planets in the ninth house. So she kind of from a young age got used to just moving everywhere and going everywhere and changing all the time. And she talked about as she got older, like her family never really taught her how to persevere in situations or like the rewards of persevering in situations. And we can see the ruler of the fourth house of family is square that Saturn in Aquarius. So my family never really like taught me the rewards of discipline and following things through to the letter. There was always this need to escape, or this need to kind of like pick up whatever you've got in your car and just go because fuck it, like it sucks here. And like I said, the ruler of her ascendant is opposite Uranus. And so, yeah, it was just like this kind of crazy, chaotic childhood where she didn't really know like where she was going to end up. And she said because of like the moving around, she never really felt like she belonged. And in her book, she's quoted as saying, like, do I even have a right to be alive and like be here? And I think that's very much like the Jupiter conjunction Chiron in her first house. Because Chiron, when we talk about Chiron in astrology, Chiron was originally like in mythology, orphaned by his parents and like given up and rejected and orphaned. And so, whenever somebody, and there's different expressions of Chiron, but, as far as the ruler of her ascendant in her first house in a conjunction with Chiron, I do think, even though she's like stunning, beautiful woman, talented, like, had all these amazing, lucky things happen to her, Jupiter rising in Pisces in the first house, right? Lucky things happening to her. Even though she had all these things happening to her, there was always this like self-esteem issue that she talked about in her book of like, I don't belong, or I don't belong here, or like something about me is bad or wrong. And I really do think, and she does talk about in her book, like when she found out that her father wasn't her real father, that the father that had raised her whole life, at that point, when he knew that she knew, he like left her. Basically, he didn't like engage with her too much after that and kind of abandoned her. And then her mother just completely went off the deep end and was doing her own thing. And so she said as a teenager, as young as 12, 13 years old, like she felt orphaned and abandoned. And that's a Chiron. That could definitely be like a Chiron type of a situation there with the ruler of her ascendant in a conjunction with Chiron. And so we start with that, feeling like she's orphaned, feeling like she doesn't belong, feeling like she always needs to put on a smiling Jupiter face for everyone, but inside is feeling broken down. And, and it's interesting with Demi Moore because even, her parents were both alcoholics and has struggled with addiction. And she also has struggled with her own issues with addiction. And, like she does have, the sun, Neptune, the sun opposite the moon, or the moon opposite Neptune, sun, Neptune. And, the Chiron in Pisces can definitely, not too stereotype Pisces, because not all Pisces are addicts or having issues with addiction. But I do think like when you grow up in chaos, feeling like there's something wrong with you and that you're always having to adapt your personality, I do think that that is probably a breeding ground for addiction, and as Demi Moore definitely struggled with addiction later on in her life. It came up at multiple times. And so, so she was always trying to like be accommodating or please others while she's hurting inside. And, yeah. So she just said that her family was always traveling all the time, Jupiter rising and opposite Uranus, ninth house focus there, that they were always traveling all the time. And she said she came to kind of like get bored sometimes if she was in one place too long, and that she needed like the juice of it, of traveling in that chaotic life. Although on the other hand, she talked about being around her grandmother, who was like a really stable person to her, and how she always felt very grounded and chill and like just really connected to her environment when she was around her grandmother. And you can see that moon in Taurus part of her that really needs to be fed from a nurturing perspective of feeling like grounded and stable. And so let's go ahead and talk about the Jupiter Chiron in Pisces in her first house here. because Jupiter Chiron conjunction in Pisces was a general generational aspect that happened in the early 60s. So if you see anybody's chart from the early 1960s, you'll find this Jupiter Chiron conjunction. It's more prominent for her because it is in her first house, so it is a very prominent thing for her. But Chiron in Pisces, it can have to do with the feeling of feeling victimized, caught in addictive habits, overly selfless, feeling depleted, giving versus nurturing, finding the balance between giving versus nurturing yourself. And there is a lot of that in this chart that demands to be looked at, is what I feel. And self-care is hard, a tendency to go overboard with escapism. Also, Jupiter can be too much of a good thing. Like, we're having too much of a good time, and we're having too much of a good time to the point where I'm actually hurting myself with Chiron there. Okay. And so I'm just turning the page here, but it's interesting. Like I wrote here, Jupiter is very generous, and, Demi Moore was always very compassionate. Like, even though I'm going to tell you some things that her mother did that you guys are like, oh my God, you'll probably be like, that is unforgivable. But even though her mother did all those things to her, she was there with her mother on her deathbed. As her mother was passing away from cancer, like she was there taking care of her the whole time. And she said it was like one of the most rewarding experiences, taking care of her mother while she was on her deathbed. And so you can see that very, moon opposite Neptune, sun Neptune, Jupiter rising, right? Very like Pisces rising, very compassionate nature, very loyal nature. That you find, very much a caretaker for others. And, how that like, taking care of her mother, she said, like, healed a wound for her. And so I think that is interesting about her chart, like Jupiter rising, very generous, but maybe to the point where it actually hurts her or it's not good for her. She talked about when she was caring for her mother that she started like smoking again because her mother was still smoking up until, like the day she died. And so you have this whole thing where I'm giving and I'm selfless, or I'm trying to take care of other people, but I'm also like hurting myself in the process, and possibly like hurting my health too, because Chiron does have to do with like a healing journey. It can have to do with our health. Especially in Pisces, about the emotions and having that healing journey. And, with the Jupiter rising, like a lot of times when she was interviewed later in life, it was like, you have a husband, Bruce Willis and her were married. You've got a husband, you've got 3 beautiful daughters. You're making millions of dollars a year. You've got this beautiful home in Idaho. Like, you have everything, right? But inside, she didn't feel that way. And so I think we do see that Chiron kind of, emptiness that threatens to take over. And Pisces can be like that, very emotional, moody, up and down at times, very sensitive, caring, giving, all of that too. But we see that opposite side of that too. And I just want to tell you guys a little story about when she was filming a movie in Brazil. Demi Moore in her early 20s was filming a movie in Brazil, and she talking about getting carried away with too much of a good time. So she's young, she's in Brazil, she's partying, she's doing tons of cocaine, she's, she's drinking all the time, she's on this movie. It was one of like her first movie roles, and they were taping in Brazil. And because she was like so high on life, basically, that she, instead of having the stunt double do her scene, she just went off of a cliff, like hang gliding towards the Atlantic Ocean with no training, no anything, no stunt double. She just went hang gliding randomly during this movie. And I mean, she could have really hurt herself or injured herself. She had no training. She didn't know what she was doing. And so we also see that kind of Jupiter kind of protecting her, the energy of Jupiter being kind of a protector, But we also see that whole thing of, I'm having too much of a good time. And, Jupiter opposite Uranus, like, fuck it, caution to the wind, who cares? But I could actually seriously hurt myself, right? Chiron and Pisces by just whatever throwing. And I just thought that was like particularly Piscean to be like jumping off of a cliff towards the Atlantic Ocean, right? I was like, also very Sun Neptune. Like, I'm just going to jump off a cliff towards the ocean and see where the wind carries me, opposite Uranus. Okay. So I thought that was a really like interesting story about how she went too far in that we're all having a good time. And she also talked about, like, with drinking, that maybe other people could have a drink here or there, but she just couldn't. Like, she had no off switch for her drinking. Like, she just couldn't stop. And I mean, the genetics and the alcoholism with her parents, like, obviously contributing to all of that. Now, let's go. And I do feel too with this Jupiter and Pisces with Chiron, her whole life, she was trying to do her best not to let other people down. But I also feel like perhaps she didn't, and it's weird because later in life, she did go through a period where she was being a little bit more selfish, or she was, and even her children stopped talking to her at one point. But I think she just had so many years of not honoring herself that when she started to honor herself, some of the selfishness that like her own parents had kind of came out in her. And you can see the ruler of the 10th house representing mother is in Demi Moore's first house with Chiron. And so there may be some qualities that Demi Moore like shares with her mother in that whole regard of, because you can only do that for so long. And I think a lot of codependence, for those of us that have struggled with codependence, we give all of our, energy to other people, but then there comes a time when you break. And then oftentimes, when that happens, it's like, kind of like regressing back to like a teenager. And it's like, I want this and I want that. And that's very much with the Taurus Scorpio energy of give me this, I want this, I need this, right? And yeah, so we're going to talk more about the Taurus Scorpio in her chart because it is a huge signature. And whenever these 4 planets up here get triggered by transit, major things happen in her life. And you can see why, because this is a heavy duty configuration. This 4 planets in Scorpio opposite moon in Taurus. So let's go ahead and, also Jupiter and Pisces, like, let's just slap a Band-Aid over the situation and everything will be fine. Maybe not going and with Neptune there, because you think, okay, with Scorpio, you're going to have somebody who's want to go deep, deep, deep into everything. But I also think because she has Neptune with all those Scorpio planets, plus Jupiter rising, there may be a tendency to just kind of put a Band-Aid on things and keep going and not really like pay attention to what's happening in her life. And yeah, so she talked about in her book about always needing to appear upbeat and cheerful while breaking inside. And like I mentioned, that kind of like energy is fertile for addictions in the future or for creating addictions and addictive personalities. So let's go ahead. Okay. And another thing I just wanted to mention too is, she does have Jupiter rising. So like I mentioned, she has had some very lucky breaks, and we'll talk about that more later when we talk about her career. But it's interesting because Jupiter does rule the 10th house of career, and she has it rising here. And at one point, she was the highest paid female actress in Hollywood. And people started calling her Gimme More instead of Demi Moore, Gimme More, because people were in the news. People thought like she was always demanding more, but she kind of like rejects that. But a lot of people kind of gossiped about that or said like she's being greedy or whatever, which, sometimes with Scorpio Taurus energy, there is that energy with those 2 signs of being greedy or being selfish. And, as much as she could give to other people, and I'm not saying she's selfish for wanting to be paid the same as men. And I think that's what she was going for, right? But like, anyway, it's just interesting because we're going to see these issues come up a lot in her chart. And let's see what else we have here. So let's take a look. I want to talk a little bit about her. Obviously we see the Jupiter opposite Uranus in her 7th house of partnership. So I want to talk a little bit. We're going to go into great detail on her partnerships because she's had some very interesting marriages. She's been married and divorced 3 times. And, Uranus is definitely a divorce planet and can sometimes indicate, and I'm not saying if you have Uranus in the 7th house, you're going to get divorced, but I know I got divorced when Uranus was moving through my 7th house. So, I mean, I'm right here, like I'm an example of that. And sometimes transits of Pluto or Uranus through the 7th house can represent that. But when we see the ruler of her ascendant opposite Uranus, there was, like I mentioned, bouncing around, growing up, no stability, things always in flux, things always changing, a lot of instability. Now, of course, because Uranus is in her 7th house, this kind of like rushing around and going really fast and jumping into things really quickly and impulsively. We can also see like Venus, the ruler of her Venus, which represents relationships, is also square to this Mars, right? So impulsive relationships. Also, the ruler of her 7th house is also square this Mars. So, stability, going too quickly, going too fast in relationships. And when she married Bruce Willis, and I'll show you guys Bruce Willis here, when she married him, they met. And from the time they met, here is Bruce Willis here. Okay. Bruce Willis is the father of her 3 daughters, but, and that's her 3rd husband, Ashton Kutcher, which we'll talk about later. But Bruce Willis was the father of her 3 daughters. She met Bruce Willis, got married to him, and was pregnant with their first daughter, Rumor, in 4 months. 4 months after meeting him, married, kid on the way. She got pregnant the night of their wedding. So that is a little bit wild. That's a lot, and we can see the impulsive energy. And it's an interesting story because her and Bruce Willis were gambling in Las Vegas, and he just turned and looked at her and said, "We should get married," and she's like, "Okay." And so they just did. So it's like these very impulsive decisions around relationships and love. She said they didn't really know each other when they got married at all. I mean, so they had to, after they got married, then they started kind of figuring things out. She talked about being rebellious against Bruce Willis. We see her opposite Uranus in her 7th house of relationships. She talked about being rebellious against him because he wanted to be the breadwinner and he wanted her to stay home and raise their daughters. And he told her stuff like, "This isn't going to work, because you want to work too." And so she talked about how she was like rebellious against him and still continued to work, which ended up being an issue in their relationship. So we'll talk more about that later. But Uranus is definitely a planet of rebellion and also like, doing things really quickly. Mars is also like that too. So we see there's all this Uranus Mars energy and, Pluto in the 7th house of her partners, trying to change her. And she did talk about how she felt that she changed for like every person that she was with. She had to change to kind of become what they wanted her to be, which is also very Pisces rising. But I mean, it also is very Pluto in the 7th house of, like there's a lot to uncover. Like, yeah, this marriage, like we got married within 4 months, but there's a lot more here that we need to uncover. And we'll talk more about that as we get into her relationships. And yeah. let's see what else I wanted to talk about. Yeah. And so with her first husband, Freddie Moore, where she gets this was her first husband. I'll show you guys her first husband. You know what? I'm going to wait to talk to you guys about her first husband because it's a whole story. But suffice to say, when she met her very first husband, Freddie Moore, she said she was spontaneously attracted to him and she felt such a freedom that she just moved in with him within a month. And they started like, again, with her opposite Uranus in her seventh house and Venus square Mars and the ruler of her seventh house square Mars, like, let's just fricking go for it. Like her very first husband, who she married when she was 18 years old, like she got married at 18 years old. She said it was like this spontaneous thing and they moved in together within a month after knowing each other. And, sometimes like Venus square Mars, we're not really focusing in our relationships, perhaps on the consequences of our actions, or we're just kind of like headstrong, kind of going for something. And at the time that those two met, he was still married to his high school sweetheart at the time. And they just and he was also 29 years old. He was way older than her. She was only 18. He was 29 and he was still married when they met. And, those two just did a real fuck it, throw caution to the wind type of thing. And so you can definitely see that with the ruler of the first house opposite Uranus in the seventh. Like, I don't have to keep beating that drum, you guys, but you know what I mean by now. And, there's like an absolute freedom that comes with Uranus and this whole thing where she feels like she's a free agent. And again, she moved out when she was 16 years old from her mother and kind of just started like jumping into serious relationships, like living with men much older than her. And again, these men need to be taken to task because it's like, what are you doing with a 16? We don't, obviously we all know, like, I don't approve of that at all, but at the same time, she did not have any adult supervising her because most people's parents would not let them move in with, like, she moved in with a boyfriend when she was 16 years old. She met her first husband when she was 17 and was already moved in with him, married him when she was under 18 when all this was happening. But I think it just highlights the complete lack of adult supervision in her life and just the total freedom that she had to do kind of whatever she wanted. And that happens when you don't have any reliable adults in your life to to be there for you or to back you up. And the father that she thought was her father, also, like I mentioned, when she found out he wasn't a real dad, he backed away from her. He had a real weird vibe towards her after that. And he ended up committing suicide like the year before she turned 18. And we can see the father here in a square to Saturn in her 12th house with the South Node. Very sad situation. What happened to the father that raised her. And then she was essentially on her own, and her mother had like nothing to do with her life decisions from then on too. And so she just had no one watching out for her. So if you're 18 years old or 16 and you want to go do this and go do that, you don't have any parent like putting perimeters on you, then, you're just going to probably do it. And so I think the Uranus there is a big thing for her. And I think it's affected her relationships, her stability, like rushing into things, impulsiveness, for which I think she has paid the price for in her life, which we will talk about later. So she was a free agent to follow all her own whims. And when she met her first husband, she dropped out of school and wrote a song with him because he was a musician called Changing, which I think is interesting with this Uranus Pluto in the seventh house there. But like, you know, I mean, just her whole world shifted as she hooked up with him. And the other thing too, with Demi being in an opposite to Uranus in her seventh house, is her third husband, Ashton Kutcher, she married when she was 40 and he was 25. And so there was a 15-year age difference in that marriage, which is also a very like Uranian type of a marriage. And so, you know, she's had many of these kind of Uranian marriages and issues. And again, she said, I changed myself so many times to fit what they needed. Also, you know, when she was married to Bruce Willis, he was like, I don't know if I want to be married anymore, you know? So she was also kind of with people that at times had commitment issues as well. So we see that Uranus energy opposite the ruler of her ascendant really playing out in this particular chart. But let's go ahead. And so now that we've talked a lot about that, I just want to mention a little bit about the Taurus Scorpio energy in her chart. Okay. So before we get into analyzing the ascendant in more detail. So when we look at Scorpio Taurus, right? First of all, we have to think about these two signs. They're very primal in nature, like Taurus, Scorpio, very primal, having to do with need and lust and desire and cravings, food, the body, okay, sexual urges, primal. They're very primal signs in a lot of way. And, you know, the Taurus energy, like with her moon in Taurus, like she's very much like an earth mother. And you see these photos of her. I just think this is fascinating because first of all, like she does have this moon in Taurus opposite this Venus in Scorpio retrograde. Now, as we know, Venus is in fall in Scorpio, so it's a tough position for Venus to be in. But, you know, one thing that Demi Moore did, you guys are going to die when you see this. Do you guys remember the Vanity Fair shoot, that photo shoot that she did when she was pregnant? Look at this, you guys. I'm going to click on it. There she is right there. And she was on, I think this was this was like in 1998 or 1999. She was on the cover of Vanity Fair at the time, and she was pregnant with her first daughter. And she just did like the hand bra thing where you kind of put your hand around there. And, you know, she's like, and it's interesting because this Vanity Fair cover of this magazine became one of the most iconic pictures of all time. It's like listed up there with like the top 50 kind of like, you know, this Vanity Fair cover was a controversial hand bra nude photograph of then 7 months pregnant Demi Moore on the cover of Vanity Fair about a cover story about Demi Moore. Now, what's interesting is some people were saying like, you know, like they absolutely hated it. And society had never seen like on a cover of a magazine at that point in 1988, 1989 of like a pregnant woman in that way. And some people were absolutely like pissed off about it. Like they're like, this is lewd and, you know, depicting a woman pregnant and how dare you? And, you know, there's like a lot of people condemning her for doing this photo shoot. Of course, there were other people that were like, yeah, that is super cool. And she was kind of the person that set that up for future generations. So I think like Kim Kardashian has done pictures, you know, pregnant in this kind of a way before other stars have done it. But she was kind of the first one to do it. And I think it's very interesting because this is like, of course, like a very Mother Earth type of a thing to be like, you know, I'm pregnant. I love my body. I'm beautiful. I'm so happy being pregnant. And she talked about how she loved being pregnant and how she loves being a mother. And let's look at her chart again because her ascendant is actually sextile her moon in Taurus. So it's like, I love being a mother. Like being a mother suits me. I love being pregnant. Like she's talked about that a lot, but leave it to a Scorpio, right? Leave it to a Venus retrograde in Scorpio to go on the cover of Vanity Fair and do like some type of photo shoot like that shocks people, pearl clutching, all of that. Leave it to a Venus in Scorpio retrograde to go and do some photo like that, right? But it's interesting with Taurus and Scorpio because they are primal signs. And, there's nothing more primal than being pregnant and giving birth. There's nothing more primal than, than motherhood or like what it takes to become a mother or the process of, getting pregnant. Like it's a very primal in my body type of a thing. And Demi Moore has had this Venus moon opposition is literally, besides the Jupiter opposite Uranus, like this Venus opposite moon, moon in Taurus opposite Venus in Scorpio. This is literally one of the most important aspects in her chart. Like it is on fleek, and I'm using a very old word. Nobody uses that anymore, but it is literally like all over the place because have you ever seen anything more moon in Taurus opposite Venus in Scorpio than this cover page? Like it shocked me because I was like, of course, she's like Mother Earth and she's beautiful and she's glowing, but people are like highly offended by it. And it's very much like showing the body in a very raw way. And so it's so interesting with her Venus retrograde, how over the years, like people have had so many opinions about how she looks and how she acts and what she does as a woman, which for those of you that haven't seen my video on Doja Cat, I did a chart reading on Doja Cat a while ago. You can find it in my playlist. And Doja Cat has Venus and Scorpio in her first house. And, she shaved her head. She's gotten all these weird tattoos. Like, she's like, I don't care what you think. I'm going to rock me. I'm going to look how I want to look. Right. She also has Venus in Scorpio in her first house. And again, Demi Moore doesn't have it in her first house, but this is a very prominent Venus that certainly can stir up some controversy. Also, there's been a lot of cheating and infidelity in her marriages as well. Now, I'm not saying if you have Venus in Scorpio retrograde that you're going to have, you also have to keep in mind this Venus is in a conjunction with Neptune here. The sun's in between it, but it is in a conjunction with Neptune. There's a lot of other stuff. The Venus is squaring Mars. The Venus is opposite her moon. Like, so there's a lot going on here. So I don't want you guys to think, oh my gosh, I have Venus in Scorpio retrograde. I'm going to like have lots of cheating and betrayal in my marriage or partnership. I'm definitely not saying that, but she really has. And of course, Venus in Scorpio does have to do with trust. But Venus is also in Scorpio, is in a Mars ruled sign. And Mars is all about, IDGAF. I don't give a fuck. Like, if I'm going to go on the cover of the magazine 9 months pregnant and do a quote unquote lewd photo shoot, like whatever, like this is me and this is what I'm doing. And I also just want to show you guys too, like her, she has been on a list for the last, like, I don't know, 20 some years for having one of the worst dresses ever worn at the Oscars, which I also think is like so Venus retrograde in Scorpio. And let me show you guys what she wore, the outfit that has to this day, I mean, it was like over 20 years ago that she wore that outfit, but she's still showing up on these lists where it's like, this is an atrocious outfit. And I think that is so Venus retrograde. because if you look at here, I'll show you guys. Yeah, here's a movie where she shaved her head. Like she's just done a lot of really like scorpionic drastic things. She was doing both these movies at the same time. One is Striptease, one is the shaved head GI Jane. There's her training for GI Jane. Look at that Scorpio. Look at that grit, Moon and Taurus, right? Get it, girl. That's her first husband. And then here's her outfit, you guys. So look at the outfit she wore. She's wearing to the Oscars. Those are biker shorts. And she made a bodice. She made it herself. And it has like metallic flower prints on it with these horrendous biker shorts. And it's literally like and she's just so happy, right? She's like, hey, look at me. It's very much like, F it, I'm going to do me, which is, when it comes to my beauty and the way I look. But it's funny to me because she got like, on the worst dress list, which is very Venus retrograde. And let's see what else. Yeah. So Venus also has to do with love affairs, shopping, toys, marriage. And what's interesting is I'm going to wait till we talk about her money to talk about her insane doll collection, but she has an insane doll collection. We'll talk about that in a minute. But love affairs, Venus has to do with that. Venus is retrograde in detriment in Scorpio. But, we see there has been a lot of, issues in her marriages with infidelity and cheating. Also, she has been in a lot of like films that at the time were very controversial, like artistically, which I also think is a Venus retrograde thing. And, Demi Moore is also known for her signature, like raspy voice. And, Venus would definitely have to do with our voice and how we sound. And, Venus in Taurus is kind of like a voice like honey, but Venus in its opposite sign, Scorpio, she does have that very kind of raspy voice that she has been known for. And, it's interesting in her book because she talked about all her life, she punished her body by extreme working out. Okay. And of course, when we're thinking of the body and body versus beauty, or how we feel about our bodies versus our beauty, we would definitely look to the moon representing the body and Venus representing beauty. Like, how do we feel about ourselves on the outside? And then the moon, how do we feel about ourselves on the inside? And you can see the moon in Taurus representing the body opposite Venus, okay? Like how I look on the outside. And Demi Moore talked a lot about, her eating disorders and how she would work out obsessively and how she would, she wrote in her memoir, she would try to punish her body and dominate and control her body. Now, look at that moon in Taurus, the body, okay? Sensual, aware, in the moment, like loving food, wanting nourishment, opposite all those planets in Scorpio. Like, I'm trying to dominate and control my body. And so that's really like a lot of what she has dealt with. Now, I would also say too, like, well, we're going to talk about, okay, we'll talk about that later, but I just wanted to bring that up for you guys because and again, if we think about, my beauty and my body, right? Venus, the moon, are both squaring Mars in her chart. So I want to dominate and control my body. And look at some of the pictures here. When she was training to be in the movie G.I. Jane, look at that. She would just train crazily. And to be in that movie, G.I. Jane, she actually trained with Navy SEALs, like for real. And, for being like this very like tiny woman, she is an extreme like powerhouse when it comes to her body. And that's very moon and Taurus. A lot of moon and Taurus people Also, I think, when it comes to like food in the body, like Taurus people, I'm a Taurus, so I know, but we can have, we like food, we like treats, we like things, and we can go overboard with that. And the pounds start adding up, and I think her whole life, she was kind of dealing with that energy with her body. And I think that that is very Taurus Scorpio. And she talked about how she had to have a padlock on her refrigerator when she was training for various movie roles that she was in. She literally had to put a padlock on her refrigerator. And to me, that's just very Moon and Taurus. Like, I want food, I want, or I like eating these things, but I can't because of these like movie roles. So that's a very interesting thing about the Moon Venus stuff that Demi Moore has in her chart. Now, let's go ahead and let's take a look at some of the aspects that her ascendant is making to the rest of her chart. So right away, we can see the ascendant is at 22 degrees Pisces, and it is in a sextile to her moon in Taurus. And that's a beautiful sextile right there. Also note that the moon rules the fifth house of children. Note that Demi Moore has 3 beautiful daughters, as we saw. And I'll show you guys a picture of her daughters again. There they are. 1, 2, 3, her 3 daughters. This was back in 2003. So they're, a lot older now. But, she's got 3 beautiful daughters. She loved being pregnant. It's real like Earth Mother type of energy. I saw an interview with her where she's showing, like at her house in Idaho, she has this like green room for all of her plants, and she's got like a ton of, rescue dogs around her. It's very much like, this is my green room with all my plants, moon and Taurus, and I'm nurturing everything around me. And, she said like the thing she's most proud of in her life is her daughters. Like, she loves them. She's fierce about protecting them, right? Mama bear, very fierce energy. We see the moon squaring Mars, like, you mess with my family, you mess with my daughters, you mess with me type of energy. And, so yeah, the moon in Taurus, like, sextile her ascendant, ruling the fifth house of children and pregnancy. I have children easily, or I love children, or I love being pregnant, and I love being a mom, and it all feels very natural to me, which isn't always the case, with women. Women don't always, not every woman feels that way. So I think that that is very much evident there. And interestingly, like, she said for her daughters, she wanted them to have like a much more stable life than them. So she raised them initially in a place called Haley, Idaho. And they had this big, they didn't live in Hollywood at first or Los Angeles. They actually lived in Idaho. And she wanted to give her daughters like a very grounded environment to kind of grow up in. And so I think that's very evident by her children in her third house of everyday environment in Taurus. So yeah, wanting to give my children like a much more stable daily life than I had. And that's really cool. So we've got that. Also, you'll see her ascendant at 22 degrees Pisces is also trining that Venus and trining her sun. And first of all, Sun-Venus conjunction, beautiful woman, extraordinarily beautiful woman. And she's 61 years old and she still is stunning. Like, not all of us have those kind of genes, but she does. And, just like what a, shining light, what a like, and she has been noticed a lot for her beauty in her life. Now, again, she's had major self-esteem issues, right? The ruler of her ascendant conjunction Chiron, her Venus opposite her moon. Like, she has had square Mars. Like, she has had a lot of issues, feeling like she's not good enough, etc. But she really shines in the public eye. And a lot of people and it wasn't always, people didn't always have a positive opinion of her, but generally like very beautiful, attractive, magnetic woman. And also in her chart too, we see this ascendant is trine this Venus in Scorpio. And Venus also rules the third house of siblings. And she does have one brother. So this says, my ascendant is in a trine to my third house. My third house represents my siblings. And one quote she said about her brother, about her and her brother, is, we may not have parents, but we have each other. And so she has this closeness with her brother. She also has an amazing closeness with her aunt and uncle, who have later, like they really have been there for her and have been very stable for her in her life. And the third house represents, siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, like other relatives besides, mom and dad. And so you can see the very positive relationship. Her ascendant is trine the ruler of her third house, Venus. And then we also have that lovely moon in Taurus in her third house. So it's saying, I get along with my brother. I get along with my aunt and uncle. They're amazing. They keep me stable in life. They keep me grounded in life. So she does have that very beautiful energy there. Also, Venus does rule the eighth house of her partner's money. Okay. And her ascendant is in a trine to her partner's money, to this Venus. And, when Demi Moore got divorced from Bruce Willis, she got a $90 million divorce settlement. And at that time, that was one of the biggest, and I think to this day is still one of the biggest divorce settlements that kind of anybody's gotten. And so we see her in a trine relationship. Now, again, Venus retrograde in Scorpio, she lost the relationship, which is sad. And there was, issues, infidelities, like there was things going on. I don't know necessarily with Bruce Willis, but there was in her other relationships. She did say that she thought maybe I don't think she cheated on him, but he may have cheated on her, but I don't know that for a fact. But again, I don't know that for a fact. She maybe kind of alluded to that in her book a bit, but Ashton Kutcher did cheat on her for sure, though. It was a news story, everything. The women came forward, etc. But again, she's in a trine to her partner's money, $90 million in that divorce settlement. So talk about, ascendant trine Venus, right? And again, I talked about how beautiful she is. She's 60 years old. She still looks stunning, amazing, all of that. She also, her ascendant trine Venus in the sun, she did get noticed a lot for her beauty. Her first big break that she got was actually into modeling, for elite modeling. And she, when she was like 18, 19, and she talked about how modeling was like her first time of getting to kind of have her own money and do her own thing, but it also made her very insecure because it was all about how she looked, and she did have insecurities around her look. So that is a very interesting thing there as well. And okay, I think that was all I wanted to say there. Let's talk about her money a little bit. Okay. So if we want to talk about someone's money in their chart, we would look at the second house, and we'd also look at the 11th, money from the profits of your business. But just, do I have money? Can I make, am I saving money? Do I have money? We see the second house, and we want to look at the ruler of the second house, which is going to be this Mars in Leo in the sixth house. Okay. And, I talked about how she doesn't have really any fire in her chart besides this Rahu North Node in Leo and the Mars in Leo. That's the only fire she has in this whole chart. And it's interesting because when she was with her first husband, she talked about how eager she was to prove that she could make money on her own. And, and so you can see that Mars and Leo, that fiery thing that she has about money and overcoming challenges in the sixth house, right? Money may stress her out at times, but she also has this attitude of, I'm going to conquer my challenges when it comes to money. And I want to prove myself. I want to show that I can do this on my own, right? Mars and Leo. And, she also wanted to be, like in control as well, which is very much like of her money and have money as a woman. And we can see, the fixed sign energy with Mars squaring both of her planets in Taurus and her planets in Scorpio. So I want to be in control of my money. I want to have money. But there's some things about the way that she kind of made money that she talked about making her uncomfortable. So I want to take a look, first of all, at Demi Moore's money. Okay, so my money, the ruler of the second house here, is square my Venus. Okay, so my money is squaring that Venus retrograde. So, Demi Moore made money from nude modeling when she was underage. And, you see kind of how she needed money, but also like she was being taken advantage of. And she did at the time, she's like, I got to do what I have to do to survive. Like she couldn't rely on her mother or anybody else, her father, her mother. So she had to do what she had to do. But there's this whole thing in her life about how she's kind of had to, like, my money is square this Venus retrograde, like maybe making her uncomfortable with how at times she's been viewed when it comes to money, or having to use her beauty in order to make money. And also the tension that she feels around that, especially because she also has, self-esteem issues, which we talked about with the moon opposite Taurus. And she felt like, she was happy to finally be in control when it comes to her money, but she felt like basically, let me find my notes here. But also it worked against me, is what she said, because my value was tied up. My money value was tied up in my beauty and my body. Okay, so look at this. The ruler of her second house of money is square Venus, her beauty, and square Mars, her body. And a lot of this, and it's in the third and ninth house too, which has a lot to do with media, rumors, news stories. And so there would a lot of times be like some negative news stories about the way that she was making money. And I think it's interesting because I want to show you guys this movie that she did called Striptease. And basically, this movie is, she plays like a single mom who has to, strip in order to help her daughter or keep her daughter or get her daughter back. And because her daughter was like taken from her, I think. I have to remember the whole storyline. But anyway, when she did this movie, she'd already done the movie Ghost. And so she told whoever, like the theater executives, I need $12.5 million to make this movie. Like, I need to be paid as much as the men are in Hollywood. And so people, because of her making that demand, people, like I mentioned, started calling her "Gimme More." Like, I need more, I want more money. But also too, like, this movie did pretty poorly. Like, it was like a very like low rated movie. Like, she was paid a hefty sum for it. And in the movie, she plays kind of like a stripper who needs to get her daughter back. And that whole thing of Moon square Mars, I'll do anything for my child. I'll do anything to get my daughter back. And interestingly, her daughter, who is her oldest daughter, who was very young at the time, played her daughter in that movie. So that is really crazy. But it's like this movie that I demanded so much money for, people started to be very like negative towards her, right? My money square Venus in Scorpio retrograde, because I did this movie like Striptease, and people thought it was a really sucky movie or whatever. And then I got paid $12.5 million for it, for essentially, kind of, playing a stripper, guys. Like, I mean, I'm not saying I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm a very pro body person, but like, especially back at that time, like, in the 80s, early 90s, like there could have been different views on that. And again, she was getting paid more than, which is like, go girl, like you're demanding your worth, you're demanding that you get paid. But I also think that there was negativity about it too. And you can see the money squaring the Venus right there. And, but there is this whole thing of, I'll do anything for my kids. And if I have to go do this to make money, right? My money square my kids, I'll go do it, which is interesting because she did in that movie. And the other thing I want to point out here too is the ruler of her fourth house of family is in a square to her second house ruler of money. So, she wasn't raised with money. She grew up in poverty. And, we could also see the ruler of her fourth house square, that Saturn in Aquarius with the South Node in the 12th house. Like she did not grow up with money. She grew up in poverty. And, she wasn't taught really good things about money, I feel like, from her family. So we see the ruler of her second house square the ruler of her fourth house, which is the family. And her father in particular would like scam people all the time and would get in fights about money all the time. So just not good energy there. And also, I will note too here that Demi Moore's money is also in a square to her partner's money. So that may say that, like, my partner and I fight about money or we don't agree with money. Again, Bruce Willis wanted her to stay home and not work, but she's like, I'm going to work, I'm going to be a mom and I'm going to work. And so you can see that kind of like maybe fighting about money a little bit as well there too, because the ruler of her second house is squared her eighth house, which says, I fight with my partner about money. So, and of course, my partner's money is represented by this Venus and my money is represented by this Mars. So gender roles, right? Venus, Mars, gender roles when it comes to money. And I do think this was a big thing in her life, not only in her career, like people judging her for wanting to be paid, and also fighting with her partner, maybe sometimes about these money issues. And, Mars and Leo representing her money, I want to be able to take care of myself, type of energy. So we have that there. So the money is a big thing in her chart. It really is. And it really hits with her Venus opposite moon. It really is in a T square. So it's hitting. You've got that energy there. Now, the other thing too is we also see the ruler of her second house of money here, this Mars and Leo, is in a square to the Venus. And, Demi Moore at one point when she was trying to avoid like drinking or doing other addictive things, she started like shopping a lot, which I think is also very much like my money is square, the opposition between Venus and the moon, especially in Taurus and Scorpio, like acquiring things, me needy the things. And I feel like she, like, instead of drinking or picking up the bottle, she bought like over 2,000 dolls. Like at one point, she was one of the biggest like private doll collectors in the entire like United States. And she actually had like a separate house to house all of her dolls in, which is very much like my money is squaring Venus. Okay. Because Venus represents like dolls, and it does represent like also Taurus, this sign in particular. A lot of times Taurus people, especially when they're young, I read this in an astrology book one time, and it's like Taurus people are ruled by Venus. And especially when they're younger, they kind of have that living doll kind of a look. So I think it's just really interesting that she was like obsessed with dolls, right? My money square Venus in Scorpio, like obsessed with dolls, and how much money she spent on those dolls. And she was kind of doing it as a way, like I said, to avoid drinking. And so she kind of had this whole shopping thing where she got all these toys and all these dolls and everything. It's very much my money squaring the moon opposite Venus. And she kind of involved her children in that too, especially with the moon representing the fifth house of children, because they would go and get like toys, a ton of toys together, ton of dolls. So this is a very interesting thing to me. And I'm like, yeah, it does make sense for somebody who's like a doll collector. Like, I do think that that is making sense in her chart with all the dolls. Okay. And let's see what else too. So we have, and again, you know, her nickname of Gimme More, like because she just wanted to be paid as much as the men, right? And I do think Venus in Scorpio retrograde, there it could be like taking a feminist stance in a way of, especially with her money being Mars and Leo, like I demand it, like I'm a woman and I'm an artist and I demand to be paid what I'm worth, right? So I do think that that comes up in her chart. And honestly, I do think she paved the way for other actresses to be able to kind of like demand more money and get paid the same as their male counterparts or more if required, you know? So I think that it's very interesting. Of course, the movie that she made was kind of like cheesy or not really that great, which, you know, represents the Venus in retrograde, I think. But again, her being kind of out on the front lines for women and saying, we demand to be paid equal or more if required for the work that we're doing. So I think that that is also a very interesting thing about her chart as well. Now, the very last thing that I want to mention to you guys about the money is something very, very harsh indeed. So this is a story from her book, from her memoir, and this is one of the like worst stories that I read in her book. So picture this. Demi Moore is she is coming home from school. She's still living with her mom at the time. She's 15 years old. She hasn't moved out yet. She moves out when she's 16, but she comes home from school at 15 years old and she finds a man in his 40s standing in the living room of the apartment she shares with her mother. And the man turns and looks at her, and her mother is not there. And she's just alone with this man in her living room at 15 years old. And her mother has let the man in, but her mother is not there. And the man says to her, how does it feel to be whored out for $500 by your mother? Isn't that the craziest thing you guys have ever heard? I was shocked. Like, that's what the man said to her. How does it feel to be whored out to me by your mother for $500? And the man did sexually assault her in the apartment. And, you know, she talks about having suppressed that for her whole life. And we see her money here in a square to the moon, representing mother. And of course, Venus and the moon. If we're talking about, you know, like somebody, and this is a very sad thing, right? And it is square Mars, very, you know, but how does it feel to be whored out, right? Venus in Scorpio opposite the moon in Taurus, by your mother, right? The moon. How does it feel to be whored out for $500 squaring her money? Okay. So this was a very bad, you know, this was one of the most shocking like things in her memoir, that her mother did that to her. And again, at the end of her mother's life, when she had cancer and was dying, she still went and took care of her through the whole thing. We see her son with Neptune, and then the moon opposite Neptune, like in the Pisces rising with the Jupiter rising, all the compassion and energy and everything that she put into her mother at the end of her life, even though, and again, I'm not advocating that people do that. Like, you won't find me doing that, you know, because I don't know, maybe I'm missing the gene for that. But like, you know, just the fact, if she's actually said it was very healing for her to do that. But I mean, yeah, like it's her life, obviously. Like we're not judging her experience there, but I mean, just the things that her mother did. And that wasn't the only thing. There were a lot of things that her mother did, and yet she was there at the end of her life. So very compassionate woman in that regard. And maybe sometimes to the point, as I mentioned, like hurting herself with the Chiron conjunction there in the first house. Now, let's go ahead and talk about family. I kind of already touched quite a bit on her family. So, you know, when we speak about family, the family is, of course, in general, family is ruled by the fourth house. And we can see family is in a conjunction with Neptune. No stability growing up, lots of secrets in the sign of Scorpio. We can also see the family is square. That's Saturn in Aquarius with the South Node. Very sad. Not a lot of money growing up. Definitely some poverty too. Okay. My family square Saturn. South Node in the 12th house. Her dad did make money at times, but he was like gambling and scamming all the time too. So it wasn't stable. And also, you know, a lot of mental illness in her family too. My family is square this Saturn South Node in my 12th house of pain and psychological suffering. Woof, right? That's a tough combination. And it was found out later that her mother had bipolar disorder. I mean, just a very sad situation growing up for her, for what she had to deal with. And so we see that. And she also talked about how her family never taught her the rewards of perseverance and like dedicating yourself to something when something can pay off in the future. And we can see the family is square Saturn. So the family doesn't know the definition, the Saturn definition of perseverance and the rewards of like sticking with something and developing something, which is very much a Saturnian thing. For her family, it's very much like a Jupiterian response to life of, you know, just put a smile on your face and keep having fun and having a good time. And if shit gets too rocky, then just move and run away. All right. And that is very much like, you know, Jupiter and Pisces opposite Uranus, like run, you know, like a runaway. And she was a runaway because she left home at 16, but like just in general, her whole energy in her life of at times not facing her problems and like running away from them because that is what her family taught her. Okay. And we see the family in a conjunction with Neptune, square Saturn. A lot of problems there, many, many problems there. And so let's go ahead, and quite a sad situation. A lot of lost individuals in her family. And, you know, her mother never apologized to her when she was on her deathbed, but she did say, I wish things could have been different. But again, the family is in a conjunction with Neptune, like just a lot of lost individuals. And she did mention that her parents were too caught up in their own fantasy to consider their children's feelings. And that whole thing of the ruler of the fourth house of family, square Saturn in the 12th house, feeling very neglected. That is like parental neglect or her parents neglecting her in order to engage in a fantasy, right? With the Mercury Neptune and the Neptune representing the family. So we can see all of that there. And she talked about the relationship later on with her mother when it was just her and her mother let her do whatever the hell she wanted to. She said, I rode the wave of freedom, right? Jupiter in Pisces opposite Uranus. I rode the wave of freedom, but I felt the emptiness of it. Chiron in Pisces. Okay. I rode the wave of freedom, but I felt the emptiness of it. And boy, did I relate to that. Because guys, I don't talk about my own life too much on this channel, and I'm not going to really go into it too much in this reading because this is somebody else's chart, but I can definitely relate to that energy of having no boundaries, having all the freedom that you want in the world. And then, like thinking it's a good thing, but also feeling the emptiness of it and growing up like that. I could, like, when I read her book, I was like, oh my God, like I totally relate. And that quote just like immediately hit me. And I think her chart like says it perfectly. I rode the wave of freedom, but the emptiness was there, and that was her childhood. Also, we talked about the ruler of the 10th house representing mother. Her mother was very unpredictable, opposite Uranus, and she was always the victim, and her mother always wanted to be taken care of all the time, and all of that care, focus, and attention fell on Demi's shoulders. And she said, like, when her mother was on her deathbed, like, her mother finally got what she wanted, which was to be completely taken care of by another person, which is like, it kind of fell on Demi's shoulders to do that. And that is just, that's just wild, in my opinion. So that was like the relationship with her mother, I think, too. Yeah, like, really creating a lot of patterns of codependency in her life. We can see that there. What else did she say? She said they were always caught up in their fantasy, always trying to sell you their most recent scheme. We see that family in a conjunction with Neptune. Let's see what else we have here. Okay. So, yeah. And again, her family is the ruler, the family in general, right? Mercury in Scorpio here, and is opposite her moon in Taurus. Okay. So my family is opposite my moon in Taurus. I'm so busy taking care of my family. I don't have time to take care of myself. And she said emotionally, it was her job to keep her mother alive and dig the pills out of her mother's throat. Yeah, when she was, another one of her attempts to get attention and taking all the pills and whatever. And again, with the moon opposite Neptune, with her mom, like, feel sorry for me, take care of me, putting a lot of stress on her moon in Taurus there, as I talked about earlier in the reading. And a lot of times when I do see a strong moon in Taurus, oftentimes that person somehow becomes like the de facto, like, solid one or nurturer in the family, taking care of everyone else. But you can see where she is putting literally everyone else's needs above her own. The moon represents her needs. And then we have her partner, her family, everybody here at the top of her chart. And she's opposite, her needs are opposite all of that. So it's like, I'm taking care of everyone else's needs except for mine. Interesting, right? And that's the trap of codependency that can come up in relationships, particularly when you have children of addicts who spend all their time trying to caretake their parents. But let's go ahead. And so I think she said a story one time, like, her mother tried to, like, randomly mother her, like, one day after years of ignoring her and just abandoning her. And she said, like, her mother tried to, like, discipline her at one point, and she got so mad. She said, "How dare you suddenly try to be a mother?" And then she slapped her mother across the face, right? Moon square Mars. How dare you, like, try it. And I just laughed because similar situation. I can relate, Demi Moore. But anyway, so let's move on. I think we should move on from the family. And I just want to quickly mention too, like, I think I've already mentioned a few times, but I want to kind of reiterate the point of, my needs, right? Moon and Taurus, Demi Moore's needs, opposite the Venus in Scorpio, Venus representing relationships. I'm putting my relationships above my needs, and I'm kind of like giving over my sovereignty to my relationships, or I'm having a struggle balancing my needs to the needs of my relationship, right? With the opposition there, I'm having a hard time doing that. And there you have the moon opposite Venus. So let's go ahead and let's talk a little bit about her relationships now. And one thing I'd like to mention is, so let's look at her first husband. Okay, so her first husband was Freddie Moore, and she was only, I think she was like 16 when she met him. He was 29 years old. and they got together, and she got married to him when she was 18, which of course and he, like I said, he was married to someone else when he met her. And so if we go back to this Uranus in the seventh house opposite the ruler of her ascendant, I've already talked about earlier in the reading, like the instability that has brought her in her relationships. Also, she's had 3 divorces. There's been major age differences in a lot of her relationships, and a lot of her relationships have gone like really way too fast. And it's interesting when she was talking about Freddie. So let's take a look at the ruler of the 7th house, because I've already talked to death about the Uranus Pluto in the 7th house. Let's talk about the ruler of the 7th house, which is this Mercury in Scorpio. Okay. And this Mercury is ruling the 7th house. And so right away, we can see we have Mercury square Saturn in the south node right there. So my partner is square Saturn in the south node. Now, when she talks about Freddie Moore, her first husband, she said he was quiet and focused, very disciplined and socially awkward. Okay. All right, my partner square Saturn in Aquarius with the south node, socially awkward, quiet, okay? And she said, I was the only one scrambling to connect. And she, of course, as a Pisces rising, has this need to connect. But one thing I noticed in her book is it seems like, at least in the first part of her life, she was attracting guys who were like the opposite of her, like kind of more like not gregarious, not like Jupiterian, not like overly excited about life, more like a demure Saturnian type, like somebody who is, she said he was pragmatic, recessive, and not having a lot of expression at times. And one thing she said about him, when her father died, he said to her, her first husband said to her, there's no point in crying about your father dying. There's nothing you can do. It's not going to change anything. So no comforting, no there-thering, no, no anything, no nurturing, right? And we see the partner square Saturn in Aquarius, very cold, right? A very cold response to her losing her father. So I've kind of noticed that as I was reading the book. Now, Bruce Willis is completely different because he's like pretty gregarious and open, and we'll talk more about him in a little bit, but like a lot of coldness coming from her partners, a lot of like pragmatic, like no comfort, right? No nurturing, no there-thering at all. And so again, a very cold and callous response to talking about when she was talking about her father's death, like he just died. And Freddie Moore was more private and introverted, and that a lot of her partners earlier in her life, she talked about their inability to express themselves and to communicate properly with her. And again, we see the partner in a square to Saturn represented by this Mercury. So my partner doesn't really know how to communicate like what they need, and if they do communicate, they're very like cold about it, and they're not very like nurturing or warm. And for a person who grew up with very little nurturing and a lot of like, like fake it till you make it, not a lot of security or nurturing, like having a partner who is very cold and callous like that is very triggering, I think. And just, reading about her beginning relationships in life, I really got the impression that she was kind of with people who were not really like warmly embracing her, is kind of what I was getting. And maybe they were more practical, and perhaps that's what she needed because her family was so chaotic and crazy. Like maybe she needed somebody who was more calm or serious, right? My partner square Saturn. Or maybe she needed somebody who was more cut and dry, like more Saturnian. And then, okay, so eventually she got divorced from Freddie Moore. And interestingly, when she was with Freddie Moore, let's go back and look at him. There he is, her first husband. When she was with him the night before their wedding, she actually, instead of like staying at her bachelorette party, she went and cheated on him. And again, she was very young at the time, but she went and cheated on him with some other guy, some other actor guy. And so again, we see, I talked about earlier, the Venus in Scorpio retrograde, like the pattern of, betrayal and cheating in her relationships. And, she did it. And it wasn't like, I don't think she did that as much later on in her life, but certainly when she was younger in the beginning of her life, she did engage in that. And then later in her life, other people kind of did it to her. And so you see that energy going on there with the cheating and things like that, like starting off a marriage that way, very traumatic. But anyway, so her and Freddie Moore ended up divorcing. And then she was with Emilio Estevez for a while. She didn't end up marrying him, but she said that she was attracted to him because he was close to his family and she was really craving family. And this is kind of where, like, I also noticed her habit of idealizing partners, right? My partner is in an opposite to my moon. She was really craving family, needing family, wanting to be around that. So wanting to bring in a partner, but she also like idealized her partner with the partner in a conjunction with Neptune right there, to the point where she kind of put him on a pedestal. Like, he's educated, his family is educated. I'm not educated. I dropped out of school. I didn't have any adult supervision. I never finished school. Like, I'm like, this guy is like more wise than me, or he's better than me, or kind of putting her partners on a pedestal. We're kind of putting herself down a little bit. And again, I think that is, she said his family she felt kind of trashy. She thought that she came from a trashy background compared to him. So, and I think that happens a lot of times with like kids who are neglected, right? We talked about the energy of neglect with her family squaring that Saturn, and how probably that also really hurt her self-esteem with the neglecting and the not feeling good enough and the not feeling loved, and then kind of putting her partners on the pedestal, like they know everything or they're better than me or things like that, which can really get you in trouble in relationships. Her and Emilio Estevez didn't end up getting married, but they got engaged within 6 months of being together. So again, another very quick romance, another very boom, 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 very, very fast romance. And after Emilio Estevez, that takes us to Bruce Willis. And Bruce Willis was the man that she was married to here. Okay, there's Bruce Willis. And he's the father of her 3 children. And that other guy is Ashton Kutcher, who she later married. And we'll talk about that later. But Bruce Willis. So she met Bruce Willis in the 80s, and they ended up having 3 kids together. But again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the reading, they met and were married and pregnant within 4 months of meeting each other. Again, fast, fast, quick, quick, Venus square Mars, ruler of the ascendant opposite Uranus, fast, quick, 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 go, go, go. And, one thing about Bruce Willis is Bruce Willis as her partner, he was not like shy or reserved or anything like that, but Bruce Willis liked to party. And he has, he's been sober for a long time, but he used to drink a lot with Matthew Perry. And I did Matthew Perry's chart a couple of months ago when he passed. But Bruce Willis was a partier, and we can see Bruce Willis partner in a conjunction with Neptune. My partner, he liked to gamble, he liked to drink, and he talked about getting sober himself too. So we see that kind of like partier element, or the drinking, gambling type of thing. But while Bruce Willis wasn't cold and callous like her first husband, Bruce Willis, the ruler of the 7th house square Saturn. What's interesting about Bruce Willis is that growing up, he had a stutter, and stuttering or like being unable to talk and finishing your sentence is very much like a Mercury square Saturn type of a thing. So Bruce Willis isn't gregarious or like Bruce Willis isn't cold and shut down like some of her other partners, but he did have an issue with stuttering. And so what I think is very interesting in a chart is oftentimes the planets can signify many, many different things and show up in many, many different ways. We have the same partner, but different, or we have different partners, but they fit into our chart in different kinds of ways, which I think is pretty brilliant in the aspect of astrology. But the other thing about Bruce Willis is within the last couple of years, he has been diagnosed with dementia, which is really, really sad. Like, it's just like when I heard that, I was like, oh my God, that's so sad. And again, when we see problems with the mind, and obstructions with thinking in the mind, that definitely dementia can be, Mercury, Saturn. And again, we see the ruler of the seventh house, square Saturn. That can be a sign of dementia. It can also be a sign of stuttering. Mercury, Neptune, like forgetting things in the mind, kind of like letting go. That is also very much like kind of a dementia thing too, like losing your memory or like losing track of your thoughts. And again, like, Bruce Willis, the family came out and said, because of the dementia, Bruce is having significant challenges to his communication, which, again, the partner representing the Mercury square Saturn, he's having significant challenges to communication. Of course, Mercury representing communication, Saturn representing obstructions and challenges. So we see that energy coming through with Bruce Willis, but just in a different way. And Bruce Willis mentioned in an interview earlier that when he was younger, he used to say whatever he wanted. But as he got older, he got much more careful about watching what he says as he got older and he got sober, right? Mercury square Saturn, like I'm being careful with what I say. I'm watching what I say. So I think that is really interesting with him and his, the memory issues, the dementia, very, very sad. But we see that showing up here in her chart with her partner as well. And I also just want to, there was always this thing with her and Bruce too, where he wanted her to stay home with the kids all the time. Now, keep in mind, the ruler of the fifth house of children is this moon. Okay. So my children are represented by this moon in Taurus and is opposite my partner, okay, is opposite the ruler of my seventh house. My children are opposite my partner. So I'm having trouble. And also my children are opposite my relationships. I'm having trouble like balancing my children with my relationship, or my partner wants me to be doing something different when it comes to my children. So we've got this kind of tension and battle of the wills going on with them. And in their marriage, that really caused their marriage to really decline, and why some of the reasons why their marriage didn't work out. So that is Bruce Willis. And actually they're good friends at this point. And I read a story, even though he does have dementia, Demi's voice, because she has that very signature raspy voice that we talked about with the Venus and Scorpio, like her voice is the one thing that he can kind of like recognize, or that when he hears her voice, it kind of brings him out of, the fog. And so I think that's very interesting too, with the voice and the way that her voice helps him as he has dementia and all of that. So very interesting there. And DG, hi DG, welcome to the webcast. DG pops in and says, idealizing partners is a painful self-sabotage. I can relate. Yeah, like idealizing, and I feel like a lot of kids who come from challenging backgrounds and then they meet somebody who like has their shit together, or they don't want to be with anybody who has their shit together because they feel they won't understand me, or because I came from a bad background, like they wouldn't want to be with me. And I think it's very hard. And then you also idealize your partner too, right? Because you come from such a challenging place. Like you look to hope, right? You look to hope to find like reason and meaning and a deeper spirituality. And Neptune is all about that, right? In your partner. And yeah, it can be extremely painful because like we had idealized that person over our own self and our own needs and our own judgment. And we'll see, you guys, it's a tough one. Ashton Kutcher, and I talked about this earlier in the reading, how oftentimes codependents go for their whole life, like being there and showing up for everyone else, but then break and then like head on this like different path. And that's what happened when Ashton Kutcher came into her life. And we're going to talk about more why when he came into her life, she abandoned her own judgment and used his judgment in place of her own, and how it like really hurt her. So we're going to talk about that here in a minute. Now, okay, so I think we're kind of through with the Bruce Willis years. That was quick. Let's move on to the Ashton years, because if you guys know Ashton Kutcher from that 70s show, he's married now to Mila Kunis and they have kids together, but he used to be on that show Punk'd on MTV. He always seemed kind of like a dick to me, but anyway, this is an interesting photo because Demi Moore met Ashton Kutcher in 2003, and she was 40 at the time, and he was 25 at the time. So she's not married to Bruce Willis anymore. She's just meeting Ashton, and they have this crazy electric connection. And even though she's 15 years older than him, like, they like each other. And this photo is actually from the premiere of Charlie's Angels Full Throttle in 2003, where she brings her boyfriend, Ashton, and her ex-husband, Bruce, and then the 3 kids. So this is like a lot, right? But this is her third husband, Ashton Kutcher, who was 15 years younger than her. And when she fell for him, guys, she fell hard for him, like crazy hard. She talks about in her book how she was like addicted to him. Like she just couldn't let him go. And she was like full on addicted to him. And of course, at the time, it's like, okay, there's a 15-year age difference, but let's get into it. Let's talk about this relationship, because this relationship that she had with him was a catalyst for her relapsing again. Because I didn't talk to you guys about how in her 20s, she started drinking a lot, and she eventually went to rehab and got sober in her mid-20s. And she had almost 2 decades of sobriety underneath her belt when she met Ashton Kutcher, but all of that went down the tubes. And we're going to talk about that as we talk about the Ashton years. And, she said, well, Ashton is like, he's very methodical. He's very mature. Like, he's not your normal 25-year-old. Like he invests in things. He's like, very practical minded. Again, we see the Mercury Saturn thing, but again, we also see her idealizing him. Like, he's practical, he's this, he's mature, maybe there are sides of him that are that way, but again, he's a 25-year-old guy. Now, again, men date women all the time who are like, older men date younger women all the time. So we're not going to be like hypocrites here. But at the same time, she has a very serious life. Like she has 3 children who are, who she's got 3 young children too. So this is a lot. This is a lot going on. And, the other thing with her partner in a conjunction with Neptune is saying, perhaps my partner and I like spirituality, or perhaps my partner and I get into spiritual pursuits together, particularly in the 9th house, right? In the 9th house of higher spirituality. And her and Ashton Kutcher did start studying Kabbalah with a K. And they used to have like meetings at their house where people would come over to study Kabbalah. And they were very into like spirituality and Demi Moore herself. I mean, I haven't really talked about it too much yet in the reading, but you know, she has all these planets conjunction Neptune in her ninth house of higher spirituality. Plus, she has Jupiter rising. In her book, she talks about Bruce Willis being a Pisces. So actually, she probably knows something about astrology. And she's also has like an energy healer. She has used like hired shamans to clear the energy in her house. She's like very open in like to like the spiritual world. And her and Ashton used to do like a lot of that kind of like spiritual stuff together, like Kabbalah and studying various religions and things like that. And so you see that whole, my partner is in a conjunction with Neptune in my ninth house. We see that whole, like, we're being spiritual together with my partner. We see that energy there. Now, here's where I really want to get into this, because at some point in the relationship with Ashton, he made a comment to her. And his comment to her, now he's telling her this as a 40-year-old woman who has 2 decades of sobriety underneath her. He tells her, I don't know if alcoholism is a real thing. I think it's all about moderation. Okay. And he tells this to a person who has 2 alcoholic parents and who has, you know, drank a lot and fallen off the wagon herself in her own life, who currently is sober. And so in order to be like the cool girl or to seem like I'm being what my partner wants me to be, she starts drinking again. And this leads to like a really major crisis in her life that literally, like at one point where she's scarily almost like her health is really degenerated. And if we look at like the ruler of the 7th house, okay, we see the ruler of the 7th house in the 9th house, but we see the ruler of the 9th house here, this Mars, is squaring my partner. So my partner is squaring my 9th house, which says my partner gives me really shitty advice, or my partner thinks that they're super philosophical and high-minded and, you know, Mercury, Neptune, right? But they're actually, my partner is squaring my 9th house of advice and proper thinking and proper philosophy in life. My partner is squaring my 9th house, which says my partner gives me really shitty advice and puts me in a bad position. So again, him telling her this, like, I don't know if alcoholism is real. Like, I don't know if that's a real thing. And it's like, she said in her book, instead of like listening to her own self and knowing her own truth, she was like, well, maybe he has a point, knowing full well, right? And at that point, it just led to major problems in her life. Okay. And so again, she has her blinders on, right? My partner is in a conjunction with Neptune. She's got her blinders on and she's not seeing kind of things for what they are. And the fact that he's giving her really horrible advice about her health and her well-being. And she's just kind of like taking the advice in order to be the cool girl to him. So that's pretty tough energy. And at some point when the 2 got divorced, and even before they got divorced, a major problem that showed up in her relationship with Ashton as time went on was her children versus Ashton Kutcher. So at first it was like, you can see from the, from that it's like one big, like happy family going on here. We've got the children, Ashton and Bruce Willis. But over time, their mother had relapsed. Their mother was giving all of her energy to Ashton Kutcher, like everything to try to keep this relationship going. Her daughters said that they felt very forgotten, like extremely forgotten and abandoned by their mother. And if you look at the chart, you can see my partner here, the ruler of my seventh house, is in an opposition to the ruler of my fifth house, which is my children. Okay, so my children don't like my partner, or something about the person that I'm with bothers my children, or I'm having a hard time balancing having children and having this partner. And you can see that this aspect fully comes out in her relationship with Ashton, as we see partner opposite children. Okay. And it's interesting because her children have made some comments about the relationship and have said in the media that the relationship between her and Ashton Kutcher sent her daughters into a total dumpster fire, and they're still unpacking it to this day. And then her other daughter said, I felt forgotten during my mom's relationship with Ashton Kutcher. So I felt forgotten, and and that relationship really creating a situation with her children where her children didn't speak to her for 3 years because of that energy. And so my partner opposite my children, my kids don't like my significant other. I'm having a hard time balancing my relationships and my children. All right. And so we've got that going on. Oh, DG, you always remember the red string on her wrist. What do you mean, DG? Do you remember? Are you thinking of like the fate thing, the red string of fate, or what do you mean by the red string? Let me know what you mean by that. But yeah, like, I mean, this energy between her children and her significant other, like it's always been there, and it showed up in different ways where like her partner didn't want her working because of the children, which we saw earlier with the partner opposite the children square her money, like the problems and the fights with that. But we see it here coming out in a different way with Ashton Kutcher, like this relationship driving a wedge between her and her children, which isn't good. Now let's go ahead and they said they felt abandoned, and they felt that their mother was being very needy during that time, and that they needed a mother, not a little sister. So again, she started kind of like maybe, and when she met Ashton, she's like, I finally get to like relive my 20s and like be a kid because I never got to be one. But she still had 3 young children at that time. So you see this energy sometimes too with codependence and having children, and then they kind of get to a point where they need to spend time with themselves or things like that. And then it kind of breaks, right? And then she found her new addiction in him. So, we have the partner with a conjunction to Neptune. I feel addicted to my partner. So that's a tough one. That's a real tough one, guys, about her relationship with Ashton Kutcher. Now, I think I'm going to go ahead and show you guys some transits next, because I want to show you. So we have her chart here, but I also would like to show you the chart for when she kind of debuted her relationship with Ashton. And it was at the premiere of Charlie's Angel. And I showed you guys the photo right here where she is at the premiere for the movie Charlie's Angels Full Throttle. And she brings Ashton, her ex-husband, and her kids with her. And look at her. She's like really smiling. She looks really happy. And she's at her movie premiere. And this movie premiere was on June 25th of 2003. And this is kind of where she debuted her relationship with Ashton for the first time to the media. And so I just want to look at the chart for that day compared to her chart, because I think it's very interesting. So one thing you're going to notice right away for the day that she was having a relationship at this time with Ashton and was kind of debuting it. And we can see here that at the time that was happening, she was already at 40 years old, because she has Uranus in the early degrees of Virgo. She was already hitting her Uranus opposition, which sometimes happens in your like earlier 40s or like 42, 43-ish, depending on, where your Uranus is at, like what degree it's in. But in the early 40s is when everyone has what's called the Uranus opposition. And the Uranus opposition is like the midlife crisis for people in their early 40s. It's like when the guy who's had a wife and 3 kids for his whole life decides to divorce her, buy like a sports car, and start dating his like 25-year-old secretary. Like that, that's like the cliched version of the Uranus opposition. Now, keep in mind, she's not a 40, a man in her early 40s, but she is a woman in her early 40s, and she is dating someone who's 25 years old. And you can see she's having like that midlife crisis energy at the very time that Charlie's Angel movie is premiering, and she's with Ashton at that time. And her quote about that time in her life is, "I felt like a teenager, and I had a change in my life. It was like a do-over of my 20s. I finally got to be like I was 20 again and have this do-over. And I felt like a teenager again." And that's something that sometimes it's like the cliched Uranus opposition for people in their early 40s. So she was having that at that time that premiere happened. You can also see she has Mars on her ascendant. She has this Mars-Uranus conjunction on her ascendant at the time of that premiere. And I think that that's really interesting, because if you look at the photo itself, like if we look at it, she looks like so excited and happy. And, Mars Uranus coming over her ascendant in Pisces, like maybe even a little reckless. She definitely got a lot of attention at that premiere, but Mars Uranus coming across the ascendant in Pisces, very excited, very jazzy, very jazzed up, very excited. I'm doing this. I don't care. Let's go. Let's put it out there. I'm feeling energized, right? But Mars Uranus can also be kind of like a reckless energy, or sort of like, kind of like steamrolling, or just changes that are kind of like up in your face and are very sudden and dramatic, but also like reckless in a way. So, perhaps it did look a little reckless, or it was a little reckless. Like, I'm going to invite my ex-husband and my 25-year-old boyfriend and my 3 children. We're all going to walk the carpet or whatever. And it's kind of like, okay, this is weird, but I guess we're doing it. But it's also like really exciting. Like, she looks like she's kind of like having the time of her life, or enjoying herself. And so we can see that Mars Uranus, like nothing can go wrong. Nothing can railroad me and my intentions. I'm going to have a good time. This is really fun. Like, that type of energy as she's stepping into this situation. Also, at that time that premiere was going on, when she was with him, we can see Mercury, transiting Mercury, is squaring all of these Scorpio planets, okay? And particularly the ruler of her 7th house, which is the partner. So she doesn't really, at that time, she's just caught up in the excitement. Okay, Mars, Uranus, conjunction in Pisces. She's caught up in the excitement. She's not really thinking about the problems that could be coming. She's kind of maybe ignoring maybe what issues may come up, or she's just kind of lost in the moment. And so she's not really like, paying attention to maybe some of the pitfalls that could come up. And DG says she's brave and courageous to be open and transparent. That will help her children. Way back in the day, she used to have an actual red string on her wrist. Yeah, that's so crazy, DG, because I wore one too for a long time, and it was always I still have it and I wear it sometimes. It's like the red string of fate. and like how, the unbroken like red string of fate. So I think that if that's what she meant by that, that's interesting. And yeah, I do think she's been very brave and courageous and open about her journey. And she did end up making up with her children, and it did end up becoming okay. I think with her son, with her children opposite her Venus and Scorpio and her Neptune and all of that, and even with her partners, I think she's one of those people that like loves so much that it's almost like when you love something so much and you squeeze it so tight, it's almost like you squeeze the kitty or you squeeze the puppy so tightly because you love it so much. And I think with their children, it kind of like maybe the separation was good for them for a while, but like they came back stronger than ever, and she's like recovered and she's sober. So it ended up on a good note. But at the time, her children, at first, I think they thought everyone was caught up in the excitement. I think Mars, Uranus, like everybody's caught up in the excitement. It's funny, it's exciting, it's cool, but nobody's really like having an eye out for maybe what the future potential pitfalls or things could kind of be. And sometimes like I think sometimes kids get caught up in the excitement of what their parents are doing too. But sometimes later down the line, there is repercussions to the parent. And we'll talk about those repercussions in a minute because it comes up astrologically. Because it's all kind of fun and exciting, but then it's like, then it kind of gets kind of bad as time goes on because Ashton is like humiliating her and cheating on her with like 21-year-olds, and she's still kind of like hanging on to him and won't let him go and is kind of like pushing her children to the side. So I think it built up animosity, but it's also because I feel like she never got a chance really to kind of like live that out, and she's living it out during her Uranus opposition. So it's interesting. And all those problems when you're like needing and wanting someone, right? That Taurus Scorpio, I need this, I want this, I have to have it. Sometimes it is like blinders on to think other things. So I think that is interesting too. And, yeah, so we have that going on. The other thing is the day of that event, it's so funny because the actual day of that event, the night of that event, the moon was in Taurus and it was on top of her natal moon in Taurus. And so it's just kind of funny because the moon transits pretty quickly. But at that event, the transiting moon was on her natal moon. And again, like the whole family is there, like everyone and the kitchen sink is there at that thing. So it's like, okay, we're showing like this big family support for our mom and everyone's there and it's really exciting, right? But maybe we're not aware of the pitfalls, square Neptune, or we don't know exactly what's coming ahead for us. And later, when Neptune comes out of her 12th house and transiting over her ascendant is when shit really starts to hit the fan and things start to get really bad. Like, it's excitement and fun with Mars, Uranus, and Pisces there. But, like later in 2012, as that Neptune comes over her ascendant is when things start to get real tough, even from a health perspective for her. And then the other thing I would point out about this chart too is the nodes. Okay. So the transiting north node and the transiting south node. So the transiting nodes at the time that she met Ashton were just moving into Scorpio and Taurus at that time. And the nodes move backwards. So she met him in 2003. And this chart is from that movie premiere in 2003. So over the next couple years, while the eclipses are hitting all of her Scorpio planets and her moon over the next 2 years, from 2003 to 2005, there's major things happening. And like, she marries Ashton Kutcher during that time. She, at 42, she gets pregnant and with his baby and is pregnant for 6 months and then loses the baby at 6 months, which is very, very sad. And then is trying to do IVF and it's not working. And then they finally get married in 2005. So as these transiting North Node and South Node, they move backwards in time. So they're at the end of Scorpio. So over the next 2 years, while she's with Ashton, they're going to be moving over and having eclipses over all of these Scorpio planets and, over her moon too. And I don't know the exact date that she lost the baby, but it'd be interesting to see if, when she lost that baby, if she was having an eclipse on her moon in Taurus, right? Because she's always been like very fertile and she had children very easy, but she is now 42, right? She's not like it was when she was younger. So that's interesting about the eclipses hitting all of these planets, because we're going to talk more about these eclipses in general. Now I want to show you guys, I actually want to show you guys the chart of when Ashton files for divorce from her and like shit really hits the fan. And so the chart I was showing you was from the movie premiere when Mars and Uranus and Pisces were coming over her ascendant, and there's all this excitement and they're at the movie premiere and right. And then now we are at December 21st of 2012 when Ashton files for divorce. Okay. And this is now the marriage is coming to an end, and very, very sad for her. Now, as this marriage is ending and he files for divorce, look at Saturn. Okay. Saturn is in Scorpio. All right. At 8 degrees Scorpio on the day that he filed divorce, which is 3 degrees from the ruler of her 7th house, which is that Mercury in Scorpio. And all through that time that they're getting divorced, from the time that he files till the time that it's complete, that Saturn in Scorpio is going over all of her Scorpio planets. And it is nasty. That was the roughest time for her. She lost so much weight then. She had relapsed as well and started drinking again. And she was taking Vicodin, and she was like very, very small and tiny at the time. Like her health was very bad. Like, that divorce really, like Saturn going over all of those planets in her chart. And Saturn also would have hit her sun, and it also would have been opposing her moon at the same time. And I wonder if that's the time when she wasn't speaking to her daughters, because she didn't speak to them for 3 years. And when that Saturn was opposing her moon in Taurus later on, and of course, the moon rules the 5th house of children, like her not being able to speak to her children, and her children, Saturn has to do with separating things and obstructions. And so when that Saturn hit her sun, that would have been, and it would have been opposing her moon, that would have been really, really hardcore. And she talked about her 49th birthday, which was right around this time in 2012, when on her 49th birthday, like no one was speaking to her. Bruce, her ex-husband, wouldn't talk to her. Her children wouldn't speak to her. She was completely all alone. She had nobody there with her. She just felt empty and lost. Like she'd been through rehab, but it didn't matter. Like no one was talking to her. Like she was just like alone by herself, like right before she turned 50. And this would be during the time that happened, while Saturn was making its way over all of these Scorpio planets opposing her moon. Tough energy, really, really tough energy. And at the time as well, Neptune had just left her 12th house and started Neptune in Pisces at 0 degrees Pisces. She was also having a Chiron return. So we see that Neptune Chiron transiting her 1st house. Again, the Neptune really, really draining her health, major health issues, like literally almost died. At one point she had a seizure because she was doing whippets, and smoking those weird synthetic, I don't know, synthetic stuff that you smoke. I don't know what it's called, but she had a seizure. Like, there's a lot of things that happen at this time in her life. Like, this was a severely low moment for her in her life. And as Saturn is moving across all those planets and Neptune is moving across her ascendant, like washing away everything that she kind of knew in her life that made her feel like safe and together. And it's interesting because at the time too, the nodes, these nodes here, this is now, I showed you guys a chart from 2023 where the nodes were in Scorpio and Taurus. Now, when these two are getting divorced, the nodes are back. The North node is in Scorpio and the South node is in Taurus, and the nodes are back in Taurus and Scorpio when they're going through this divorce. And again, through this whole period, she's going to be having eclipses on her sun and moon, which is nasty. As a person who's had an eclipse directly on my sun before, those are nasty times, my friends. And, you know, Saturn comes along and is moving over all these planets, and Saturn is she's kind of reaping the consequences of her actions of everything that's been going on. And it's not just about the people who won't talk to her or the people who don't want to be around her anymore. It's also about, like, you know, her physical health and her mental health and her emotional health. At the time that that split between her and Ashton was happening and Saturn was in Scorpio going over all these Scorpio planets, her two front teeth fell out because she was so stressed out. Her two front teeth fell out. And, you know, nothing says my two front teeth falling out because of stress like Saturn moving over 4 of your planets. And so that was in the eclipses as well, happening right there at the same time on top of everything, like world crashing down moment for her. Very, very tough. And so that's what we see happening as her divorce to Ashton is happening. Now, the next thing that I want to show you guys is I want to show you, that's a tough moment for her. And she does say in her book, like, that was one of the worst moments of her life. And the transits definitely say that, like, they really, really do. And next I want to show you guys, I want to show you, so we did all that. Okay. And let me do 3 for 4. And I want to do 2 for 3. Okay. So I talked about what happened in 2012, like literally how that was like the worst like time of her life. And she definitely wrote about it in her book. Like, she had a moment where she almost died in 2012 too. Like, it was not a good time for her. Now, because I mentioned earlier that Demi Moore, when she met Ashton Kutcher, she had like almost 2 decades of sobriety underneath her. I alluded to the fact that in her 20s, she was also, you know, drinking heavily, having issues, and she eventually got help in her 20s and got sober. And so I looked at, you know, what's so interesting, you guys, is I looked back to the year 1985. 1985 was a very important year for her. And this chart shows Demi Moore's chart on the inside and then August 7th, 1985 on the outside here. And the reason I'm going back to 1985, August 7th, 1985, is because that was the day that her divorce to her first husband was finalized. And I showed you guys her first husband. I showed you her first husband, Freddie Moore. And so in August 7th, 1985, her divorce to Freddie Moore was finalized. And that was her first husband. And she went to rehab and got sober. Take a look at this chart for 1985. So wouldn't you guess it? In 1985, Saturn was also in Scorpio in 1985, 30 years earlier. And this Saturn in Scorpio was going over all of these planets. And at the moment that her divorce happened, the very day that Saturn was in a that transiting Saturn was sitting on top of her sun moon opposition from Taurus to Scorpio. So again, as she was going through her divorce with Ashton Kutcher, Saturn was in Scorpio going all over those planets as she was going, and she was getting sober at that time too, as well. Okay. She was having to go through rehab at that time. Back in 1985, when her and her first husband divorced, again, Saturn in Scorpio going over all of these planets again back in 1985. And when she guessed it, she gets divorced in 1985 and she goes to rehab in 1985 too. And that is the thing about Saturn. Like, it's like we maturing or the full consequences of our actions or, these types of things are coming up. And this Saturn and Scorpio transit for her is a tough one. It is a nasty one. It's going over all these planets and opposing her moon. Now, at the same time that she was going through that divorce in 1985, there were also eclipses happening again in Taurus and Scorpio. And as she was going through that divorce, the nodes were, and getting sober, the nodes were on top of that pretty much within 5 degrees within that moon in Taurus. And so again, we look at the repeat patterns from 1985 to 2012, okay? Saturn and Scorpio, eclipses over both of those, over all of her Scorpio Taurus planets. Again, divorce, needing to get sober, going to rehab, like all of these things that happened to her both in 1985 and in 2012 as these particular transits were hitting her chart again. Isn't that wild, you guys? My mind was blown when I saw that. And if I was her astrologer and like trying to advise her a long time, I would have been watching for those eclipses going on like way ahead of time and been like, this is an interesting period. It could be challenging. Just be careful, take care of yourself, like, make sure you're not like pushing people away, try to really take responsibility for yourself. And this may be a more challenging period. And again, that Saturn and Scorpio time, but she gets sober, and Saturn is a planet that has to do with sobriety. Again, she loses her marriages, but she gains her sobriety. So I find that very interesting, very intriguing again. And I think, studying Saturn cycles in astrological charts is a really cool area of research that I would be interested to dig more into. Yeah, DG says, oh, the teeth. That's right. At the bottom. Gosh. Yeah, the teeth falling out. I mean, come on now. Like, and that's tough. Eclipses on your sun or moon, that is really tough too. And probably 2 of the most difficult times of her life. Yeah, really, really bad to the point of, again, as Saturn was opposing her moon in 2012, like the daughter's not speaking to her, like, just, tough stuff going on for her. But on a really happy note, as we end the reading here on a really happy note, she did put out her memoir in 2019. And, she's sober, she's doing well. Her relationship with her daughters has been restored. They're working through the energy. And I love the end of her book because, like I said at the beginning of the webcast, she stands out on her deck and looks up at the full moon. As I mentioned, she was born on a full moon. She looks up at the full moon and she realizes for the first time in her life that she's okay being by herself. And that she doesn't like need like tons of people around her, that she's okay with herself and having moments to herself and being alone at times. And that's a huge, huge piece of recovery for her. So I'm very happy that she got to that point. And thank you so much for being here, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the webcast, and I hope that you found it informative. If you like my work and you enjoy my work, you could always book a reading with me, and there'll be a link in the description box below if you want to go to my website, and you can book your reading directly there. So thank you so much, everybody, for hanging out with me tonight, and I wish you a very happy winter solstice. Take care.